Hello, council members, staff, and commissioners, subcommittees. I have been thinking hard about these issues last few weeks, last few months, and attended a previous housing element meeting at Lucy Stern not so long ago. I still feel like there's a moral gravitas missing here, and I feel like what we should be discussing is more on the lines of maybe rent control, maybe rent relief for families who had to leave Palo Alto in the last 6 months or a year. My rent went from $2,200 to $3,100, 8% a year the last 5 years for a one-bedroom. I think we should be discussing Buena Vista. I think it's unconscionable we're standing idly by while 100 families are being evicted for somebody's greed. Fourthly, I don't know why it's number 18 on Hillary's briefing to candidates, already number 18. The plans for the planning commissioners to planning department to turn the 15-acre site that we think of as Fry's for 17.8 RM 17, 200 housing units, densely packed. I'd rather see 100 housing units and a park. I mean, that sounds contradictory. I'm saying we should be working with our middle class and below middle class families here to keep them here, and not how to appease ABAG and how to appease the greedy special interests. Really, I'm going to sit through a few minutes of this, but I think you know where I stand.
So good afternoon all. My name is Tim Wong. I'm the senior planner and project manager for the housing element. And I am happy to announce that I think the light is at the end of the tunnel in this housing element update process through the hard work of the RHMC, our housing element community panel, the PTC, and the city council. Since we last met in August, a number of things have occurred. Most significantly, on September 5th, the city received a letter from HCD. This is attachment B of your staff report, stating that, as you recall, in July we had submitted our draft housing element for HCD review. And after a little back and forth, on September 5th, the state issued a letter stating that our housing element is in statutory compliance with housing element law. So that is really good news that we don't have to go back to them for any additional negotiation. I will point out that one of the main programs, or one significant topic was for them, was the feasibility of affordable housing development. Therefore, one of program 2.1.9, which is providing incentives for lot consolidation for very small parcels, for affordable housing. That was one of the key programs that was negotiated. And as last September, there was not a quorum, but the RHMC had an informal discussion where it looked at 6 additional programs that were recommended by the community panel. And there is a brief summary of those comments that were received during this discussion on page 4 of the staff report. Those additional programs have been included in the September 18th, public hearing draft, which you have before you. Just to point out that all the additions or text revisions that have been made from the July 17th draft are highlighted in blue for easy access, or easy reference, I should say. And as of October 1st, the PTC did recommend that the public hearing draft be adopted by the City Council, and so we are requesting the same from the RHMC, that the RHMC recommend adoption of the housing element and the associated mitigated negative declaration. So that really concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I'd just add one thing. We had hoped that the Housing Community Panel would make their recommendation before the RHMC, but we didn't have a quorum. So they're actually going to make their recommendation at the end of the month. We're expecting them to recommend 4, obviously, but they haven't actually held their meeting and their vote yet.
So that will be late October, so that will be available to the council.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that is correct, Councilman. November 10th.
Okay, then, all of the have in front of us, and the response of the HCD if there are questions. Let's see, I have 3 comments from the public. I think it might make sense to hear from the public first before we make from our comments. So each speaker will have 3 minutes, and the first will be Herb Borak.
Thank you. It's in my way, but it's on. Yeah. Thank you, Chair Schmidt and committee members. I'm a little confused about the timing of when recommendations have come from the community panel, and that I thought were discussed by a couple of committee members. I guess it was last month when you didn't have a quorum, that I thought HCD had not seen. And when I raised the issue at the Planning and Transportation Commission, I guess the way it was phrased by staff was, that my view was, well, if it isn't broken, why fix it? Because we've already gotten a letter from HCD that essentially said that what they had seen already would meet the state's requirement. So my question, any clarification are there additional programs that are not covered by HCD's September, I think it's 5th letter, that have come from the community panel and that the Planning Commission and this committee have seen, or I'm just confused about what the timing is of those. Thank you.
Thank you. Would staff like to respond just in terms of the timing of taking into account the feedback, especially since we've had now 2 informal meetings of both this group and the community panel?
Sure, Councilmember Schmidt. Yes, to answer Mr. Borak's question, there are 6 new programs that were presented, if you will, in the September discussion that have been included in the public hearing draft that was not in the July draft. And in response to his question, if we have a statutory compliance letter for the July 17th draft, why are we adding more programs? Staff's response is feel that these 6 programs that have been added just strengthen the housing element. Some of these programs include requiring minimum densities in RM zones, and just off the top of my head, but staff believes that these programs strengthen the housing element rather than take away from it.
Hillary Gittleman, the Planning Director. I would only add that if the committee would like, after the public comments, we could walk through those 6 items on page 4. I think you'll see that they're pretty, they're unlikely to stir discontent at HCD.
Good. It might be good to do that. Thank you. Second speaker, Steve Levy.
When we had the informal meeting, I think it was Karen and Greg and the staff, I thought, and it's a minor change, but it's important, I thought we had changed fixed rail corridor and a long transit corridor to places near services and shopping and with the most transportation options. And I see this language that I thought we had all agreed to change. The reason for that is that if you're trying to help people broader transportation options, options that people can actually use, are a lot more than fixed rail, which is only the Caltrain station. If you're talking about locating stuff near where schools and libraries and services and shopping are. I think it's technically correct to say transportation options, plus it leaves the council with wider discretion. Hillary, I simply thought you and Karen and I had made those changes. It's not a momentous thing, but I think it improves the flexibility.
Okay, thank you very much. And our final speaker is Tom Du Bois.
Hi, everybody. So as a member of the Housing Element Working Group, I'd like to express my concern about Housing Element 2.2.8, which says, assess the potential of removing maximum residential densities in mixed-use zoning districts to encourage the creation of smalling housing units. So that was discussed at a working group that I missed in August. Unfortunately, I was on vacation. And I think a majority of the citizens working group is interested in creating smaller units near walkable services, including myself. I'm just concerned about this method of doing it, using a method which creates an unlimited number of units in a zone. And so I understand that there'll be a practical limit on the number of units based on the FAR and the economics of the building. But I'm concerned that with density bonuses, we may end up with a much larger number of people than we anticipated. And so I'd prefer to find another mechanism, maybe a more direct mechanism to specify smaller units, possibly going back to specifying a smaller FAR coupled along with a minimum number of units on our property. And then if you guys will bear with me, I know it's agenda item 2, but I have to leave early. In terms of continuing work, I know you guys discussed it here, possibility of keeping the citizens group working and looking at reallocating some sites near walkable services. We discussed that and the committee agreed to do it, so I hope you'll allow us to continue to do that. Thanks.
If I could ask, what was the
Number?
Yeah, the number.
It was 2.2.8. Or it might have been changed. I was looking at the previous version.
It's on page 135 of the public hearing draft. It's on the bottom of page 135. There's an extra copy.
Good, thank you. Let's see, I did get one other request for speaking from Mark.
I can run upstairs and grab a couple more.
There was some over there. Let's see, I did get a card from Mark Weiss. 3 minutes.
Staying or you have to go? You have 3 minutes. Good afternoon. I'm Mark Weiss from 1788 Oak Creek Drive in Palo Alto. Council members Holman, Councilmember Price, Councilmember Schmid, former Mayor Scharf, Commissioner Kessler, Staff member Lunt, Staff member Wong, Staff member Gittleman. If you're paying close attention, you'll notice that compared to 10 minutes ago, I've literally taken my gloves off. And with due respect to Dr. Steve Levy, who I don't always agree with, I respect his point of view. And in fact, it turns out that Dr. Levy and his wife were married by the same rabbi who bar mitzvahed me, and perhaps in the same season, months apart, Rabbi Sidney Axelrod, who was both a mensch and a tzaddik, which means a good person. And I think Dr. Levy, Steve Levy, is also a good person and a mensch and probably a tzaddik. I hope to, in the next 20 years, Lord willing, if I'd like to prove myself as such. And so on the housing element per se, with due respect, and as I was saying in the orals communication, I think a lot of this, and with due respect to the hard work, including my friend Tom Du Bois, has put in. I think a lot of this is we're sort of barking up the wrong tree. I mean, due respect. But I feel this is something like when we're talking about planned community zoning, a legislative tool by which developers over the years we've let them do this and that in exchange for this or that, and it's hard to calculate. I think on a certain level, we're falling behind as we're like if we're building below market rate housing because we're concerned about the middle class and the poor, but we're also, most of that stuff coming in is market rate, and we already have a ton of traffic. The schools are taxed. We're behind, according to our comprehensive or general plan, in the per capita park acreage per people ratio. We're behind in our parks. I think I alluded to that earlier, that I believe in a park in Ventura. I believe Ventura still exists. There's a document that claims that Fry's in Ventura are now part of California Avenue. That's kind of crazy. I've lived here longer than that. I have friends who went to Ventura School, for example. I think, I said this before, no real Palo Alton wants to live above or below another Palo Alton. I think we like single family. We love RM1 or whatever it's called. And personally, I live in a unit with 50 units, a building with 50 units, a complex with 700 units, Oak Creek, and I do feel a little bit inadequate in some ways that I'm not more independent at age 50. My girlfriend, some of you know, a former commissioner, I won't use her name, she shares a wall, owns a homeowner, shares a wall, but even after more than 20 years, hard work, she has to keep working. She's not paid off. That's partially her own problem, but the reality is it's very, very difficult.
Thank you very much. Appreciate everyone coming and sharing their viewpoints with us. Okay, back to council members then. Is there anyone who would like to bring up issues or comments? Councilmember Holman.
Well, Mr. Levy's absolutely correct, and thank you for catching that. It went right past me. Program 2.1.1, you're exactly right. We did agree that it would have, and I don't remember the language, but it did expand beyond in commercial areas within 1/2 mile of fixed rail. It did include, as we discussed at the last meeting, near employers, near employments, employers, I guess, employment or employers and services, but especially employers we focused on. So that should be added.
So let me just make sure I understand. So are we taking out within 1/2 mile
No.
of fixed rail stations, or we're adding to it
Adding,
the concept of near jobs and services?
yes.
Okay, we'd be happy.
What's the reference number?
It's 2.1.1.
It's on page, packet page 5. I didn't find it in the housing element yet, but. 2.1.
Page 131 on the element.
Yeah, and on then page 131, it says 1/4 mile of fixed rail stations. So we have to decide if we want 1/4 or 1/2, I guess.
Just to clarify, the quarter mile applies to the 50-foot height exception to explore exceeding the 50-foot within a quarter mile.
Yeah, it does say 1/2 a mile above that.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Councilmember Holman, do you want to make a motion?
Yeah, I guess last time we didn't have a quorum, so it wasn't a motion, huh? So, yes, that we would further revise program 2.1.1. I'm looking at both things here. I want to make sure they work together here. Okay, yeah, so that would read mixed use for single-use projects in commercial areas within 1/2 a mile of fixed rail stations. Or within 1/2 mile of employers, you said jobs, within jobs and services. I think we just said jobs last time. Jobs.
So was the concept, though, that both had to happen, the 1/2 mile and near jobs and services?
Yeah, because the concept was that jobs near housing,
Okay.
because people are more prone to, as Commissioner Killer knows, people are more likely to walk or bike than take the train or bus.
So perhaps we could say high-density residential in mixed-use or single-use projects in commercial areas within 1/2 a mile of fixed rail stations where there are jobs and services.
No, because you're tying fixed rail to the jobs. It's
Okay.
or
and
jobs.
services. Okay.
And I don't know if it should be jobs and services. You're linking those as well. I don't mean to point to you. It's within jobs, or near jobs or jobs and services. So it could be either.
Is there a second?
No, I wanted to make an amendment.
Well, let's start.
Okay,
First, there's a
okay.
second.
Go ahead. You want to second it?
Okay, do you want to speak to that?
Well, we've talked about in particular Fry's site, but there might be other opportunities too where, again, using this scenario that people are more likely to bike or walk than take rail, it makes sense to have, housing opportunities near employers. So I think it's fairly straightforward. Oh, and also I would just add that other communities are looking at the same concept and have employed them, and it's an ages-old concept in employed practice.
Yeah, no, I mean, I absolutely think you want that. So if you want to have housing, obviously near jobs. I think you want to have near transportation, you want to have near services.
Is your mic on? He's not talking yet.
Sorry. I think we want to be a little, I'm okay with it as now, but I actually think that if you're really going to do this, it depends on what you're trying to achieve, and it's not clear exactly. We want people to bike, to walk, to use public transportation, to not use their car, and to live where they work. I mean, that to me seems to be the goals. If those are the goals, and we're going to do unlimited, I actually think it should be rental housing, frankly. In terms of, and I'm okay with, I'm just thinking this through as I talked it out loud. I'm thinking when we exceed the 50-foot height limit, it might be rental housing, frankly, if you're going to put it near jobs and housing. I'm not necessarily there. I'm okay, but I think I'm okay where it is, but I must say, I believe that rental housing is where you go with the jobs and housing. I don't think for sale housing gets you there. Let's have a discussion, and then I may be willing to amend it. I want to hear what other people think, because I'm just thinking that's sort of where that goes. But I also wanted to hear from staff on that. I mean, I don't want to just say this for political purposes and say we want to do this. I want to actually have the real effect of getting people out of their cars and having them live where they work.
Just two observations. One, in response to that idea, I mean, I think it is something that we could pursue. We could make this specific to high-density rental housing, but it limits our options down the road. So I would urge caution. The other is I just want to make sure we're not straying from the original intent of this program by making it overly broad. If we're talking about mixed areas within a 1/2 mile of fixed rail stations, that's tight. And I think the community panel was on board with that. If we're talking about areas within 1/2 mile of fixed rail stations or areas where there are jobs and services, that's a much broader expanse of our city. So I guess I'm open to, of course, what the committee wants, but I'm concerned that that may be straying from where the panel was when they discussed this program.
Clarification would be or a 1/2 mile of job center.
It's just that there are jobs and services over a wide range of the city that's well beyond a 1/2 mile from fixed rail stations. It's up to you.
Councilmember Price, you had it.
Yeah, a couple of comments. I actually am not in favor of limiting it to the rental, because I think it does reduce our options. I mean, this is a longer-term housing element to 2023 and really and beyond. And we keep talking about the need for housing and a need for affordable housing. And the way you can create affordable housing is greater density, or lot consolidation, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we have many types of. There are lots of different kinds of markets in Palo Alto. There are people who have extraordinary means to be able to purchase. There are other members of the community who are certainly not even able to rent what is already here. So I think limiting it in any way is an issue, and I would not be in favor of that. I have a question related to this particular program, and maybe it was discussed on the meeting that I missed. The issue of fixed rail and a half a mile of fixed rail is certainly one concept that makes sense. But what about transit corridors like El Camino Real? I mean, the Valley Transportation Authority is going to be massively investing in that transit corridor. And it's part of the Grand Boulevard concept, all these things that you already know. Now, is that addressed elsewhere in the element, and I haven't seen it? Because, in fact, transportation improvements and mobility improvements are going to be taking place along that corridor as, to complement, the issue of fixed rail and stations. So could you comment on the comments I'm making right now on that last part?
Sure. Councilmember Price, there is not a specific program that talks about higher density along El Camino. The only thing that that staff used, or I should say staff focused a majority of their housing opportunity sites along El Camino per council direction, but there are no programs to incentivize, if you will, or focus higher development on El Camino.
Okay, because what I was going to propose is amending this statement to include transit corridors, which is a much broader, it opens, I guess the point is, from where I'm sitting, it does broaden opportunities for housing in this community.
Although, excuse me, just to point out, although we do have a program about creating or exploring a specific plan for the Cal Ave, downtown, and El Camino areas. So as part of that program, it doesn't directly or implicitly talk about higher density, but that could be a program that's associated with your thought.
And you're talking about the California corridor area. It's California Avenue corridor area and the downtown and El Camino. Okay.
That is program 2.1.12, page 135.
Right, which you're saying it extends all the way to El Camino because it's in the environs of those corridors. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it just states El Camino areas. So there's not a specific portion
Height
of El
boundary.
Camino correct, at this point.
Okay.
Okay, let me raise an issue. The way it reads now, all we've done is add 1/2 mile of fixed rail stations or jobs and services. Now we're talking about allow high-density residential development. This does open doors for El Camino, but it also opens doors for Barron Park, Ventura, West Bayshore, Palo Verde, anywhere where there are jobs, no matter how many, how big. And it seems to me this is a pretty strong statement for opening up high-density residential development. Does staff have a...
Well, I guess my suggestion was to say within 1/2 mile of fixed rail stations where there are jobs and services.
Yeah, I thought the original discussion when we had it was we were trying to find justification for high-density housing, and it wasn't just being near a transit station, but it was being in a neighborhood that was rich in job opportunities, service opportunities. This seems to say it can be near a transit station, or it can be wherever you can find a building with jobs and services.
Can I clarify?
Yeah.
I want to clarify this because writing on the fly is not my strong suit. But I think instead of jobs, it should be employment centers. And I think that really narrows it down.
would
Because,
help,
yeah,
yes.
it should be employment centers, not jobs. So then we're talking about, California
Employment-
Avenue area or, name your
Employment
area.
centers with services.
All right, so now I need to
Otherwise,
weigh in.
you'd end up with the San Antonio Fabian area.
Well, is that bad? I don't know. And
Well, I guess
want,
all we're talking here about is intentions.
right. And while I'm at it, I think it should be rental housing because otherwise you lose that advantage of having, I'm sorry, Gail. It just, I apologize. I apologize. Because the purpose of having the jobs near the employment centers is so people will walk or bike to work. And if they're for sale, that housing stock isn't going to turn over likely, and people, who knows where they work. So I think they have to be linked.
Now, did you make an amendment to your jobs into employment centers?
Employment centers, yes. And then I guess we'll,
Does the seconder
Can-
accept that?
So I guess I need to have a broader discussion right now. I mean, I also wasn't prepared to actually have this discussion, so I'm thinking it through on the fly. I'm just trying to figure out what we're doing here. So, half mile of fixed rail station, we have 2 of them in Palo Alto, and we have 1 at San Antonio. The one at San Antonio, does that half mile, first of all, does the quarter mile of San Antonio get us anywhere into Palo Alto, or not?
Yes, into residential neighborhoods.
So it gets us some there. And then there's the quarter mile of downtown gets us most of downtown, I would assume, right? The quarter mile of California Avenue gets us most of California Avenue. So when we say employment centers, I assume that only means the research park. Where else? Well, we already got Cal Ave, because we've got all of Cal Ave within the half mile of the,
is that accurate? Is the whole Cal Ave area within?
Half a mile.
Is the whole
I
Cal
believe
Ave
it is.
area within a half mile?
It's pretty short. It cuts through the middle of Fry's site.
Yeah, so it's,
So
we
it's not
don't
all of it.
catch it all.
so it doesn't catch all. That's what I'm trying to get to. So it doesn't.
God, I thought it did. We'd have to go back and look at that figure. But you know what, if I can interject, I really think that what we were trying to do when we had this discussion at the last meeting, and I apologize, we didn't capture it fully, was it was more, I'm not going to, esoteric is the wrong word, but it was a point about, like, look, it's not as important as that it's within a half mile of its fixed rail stations as it is important that it's near jobs and services.
Yeah, but that
So
seems
it-
like a silly discussion.
It was
given-
more like a wording change than actually changing the efficacy of this program.
But why make the change then if it's irrelevant? I mean, we only have 3 fixed rail stations.
Correct.
So, and they're all next to housing, they're all next to jobs and services, except for San Antonio. And that's why I was a little, like, I'm not sure what the effect of San Antonio is, frankly. And I'm trying to understand if we're basically saying it's okay to put housing in the research park. And I'm actually might be fine with rental housing in the research park, high-density rental housing so people can live there. I'm not sure I'm good with high-density
Yeah.
for sale housing in the rental park.
I mean, this was not intended to reach the research park. It's specific to commercial areas within 1/2 mile of fixed rail stations.
But the amendment changed that. The amendment says, or employment centers. So I just want to make sure that we're all clear and transparent as to what we're actually doing. And from a practical point of view, not in this very, jobs and employment centers, and, I mean, we only have a few fixed rail stations, and we only have a few employment centers. I mean, if there's another employment center I'm missing besides the research park, we might have the circle, down there in, what do we call it, East Meadow Circle, that's an employment center.
There's another one, Stanford Shopping Center. Remember during the medical center discussions, we tried to get Stanford to build some housing to go along with the Stanford Shopping Center. So, I can go either way on this. It's like, I think it's a concept that, I know other communities, it was in one of the staff reports, other communities are looking at this. So maybe, we don't need to recreate the wheel, it's like, as we're prone to say. If there's language we can pick up from another community, or it's something that staff could come back with if something comes forward,
Well, if we're
or,
not going to make any practical difference, why change it?
well,
unless we're
Stanford
planning-
Shopping Center isn't within a half mile of,
No, but that's what I mean.
Rail.
So if we're going to make a practical difference, that's different.
It is. The map
Oh,
on,
you have the map.
part,
yeah, it's on page 21 of your packet. And the shopping center is within the half mile.
part of it is, right?
No, looks like the whole thing. Would it make sense to, instead of saying or, just say and, employment center and services, to give the notion that we want these rich employment opportunities?
Well, if you say and, I think if you tie the two together,
Limits it.
exactly.
we're
And
talking
I
about
think
the
it
three
goes back to
circles.
kind of the original intent of the program. I think is just to have a higher density around these transit nodes, if you will, around fixed rail.
That's right.
So
One,
if you
two,
tie the
three.
two, I think it's the same.
21.
So I actually would like to hear from Steve Levy, because I can see him. I'd like to hear what he has to say on this, because I wasn't at that last meeting, and I,
It's real simple. If you-
Can you stand the microphone, please?
Sure, okay. It was a technicality first, that there are places near where I live in University South that are, I'm sure, slightly more than a half mile. Okay, I wasn't going to Menlo Park, I wasn't going to Barron Park. I was trying to get a technical point out of there, whether it applies to any other area but downtown, but I'm sure there are places within the downtown corridor that are more than a half mile. That was all, one, I was trying to do. And two was what Councilmember Price brought up, is that fixed rail means those two stations. What if in the future, not now, there are other transportation options? We want the housing near transportation options. So I was trying to get transportation options switched in and fixed rail station switched out. If there is nothing but Caltrain, it's irrelevant. But if there becomes something beside Caltrain, I was trying to broaden it to transportation options. That's all. I wasn't trying to put it all over the city or anything like that.
Okay, I think we ought to keep in mind that we're talking about the final delivery of the housing element, and, small changes in wordings, like an and or an or, can have big consequences, and we ought to make sure that we're thinking through what we want to achieve. Councilmember Holman.
Just listening to this discussion and listening to how, it isn't what we were reading, and it's too big a decision, I think, to make on the fly. I really do. Because it could have significant impacts. There are parts of it that I would support, but I'm really not comfortable with us making that kind of decision on the past. And I'm realizing, having this conversation, that two of the board committee members weren't here last time to have the discussion. So I'm actually
withdrawing your motion.
withdrawing my motion. I think it's a longer discussion and a bigger consideration.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Arthur.
I think I'm on. Am I on?
Can I see your mic, please?
I just turned it on.
Yes.
Okay, great. So two things. First of all, with respect to the issue of permitting high-density residential or and mixed or single-use projects, that talks about the idea of having single-use residential in commercial areas. And there has been precedent within the city established in 2006 about avoiding high-density residential within single-use in commercial areas as single use. In particular, that's what happened when, after the Ricky site was developed as residential, and after several sites on East Meadow Circle and the Sterling site on West Bay Shore. So therefore, specifically mentioning single-use sites, meaning single-use residential, I think goes against council principles that have been established there. So I would prefer the language that is suggested here, which is to permit increased residential density projects, which is then agnostic.
Which item are you talking about?
The same item. So if you're gonna amend this, saying high-density residential or mixed or single-use projects actually predisposes a bunch of decisions that we may not wish to make at this juncture. So replacing that with amending the zoning code to permit increased residential density projects. And that talks about increasing the residential density as opposed to necessarily being high density. I mean, it's more contextual. And it doesn't specify that you're allowing solely residential projects in a commercial area that in 2006 the council voted against. The second thing is...
I'm sorry, you're suggesting drop the or single.
Well, you can drop the or single or simply say permit increased residential density projects. High density is specific. Increased residential means increased over the zoning that's there. So it's a little bit more general and not specific to high density, and also not mention single or mixed use projects. Just mention increased that's increasing the residential density over what is currently allowed. That's what I'm suggesting.
Okay.
Okay. The second.
You're saying increased density, not high density.
Right. Increased residential density projects, as opposed to high density residential. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is that I realize that you've withdrawn the amendment, but one wording, if you wish to consider that, is instead of saying 1/2 mile, you could say near fixed rail stations and employment centers. And that basically gives you the flexibility to think about to explore that, and without being overly directive. And so I would suggest that this be worded to allow for higher density residential development. Consider amending the zoning code to permit increased residential density projects near fixed rail stations and employment centers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, any further comments on 2.1.1? Okay. Any other council member comments on any other item?
I guess one question still on this one, if I could, is, this also is another big one. It's like to allow limited exceptions to the 50-foot height limit. The only thing about allowing is I'm in my mind's eye trying to figure, what that might be. So it could be, let's just say there's an 800 high project that comes along. Does it mean the whole building is going to exceed the 50-foot height limit? Or does it mean a portion of the building could exceed the 50-foot height limit? So, this is a huge community policy matter. So, I think maybe instead of to allow, but to consider limited exceptions. Something like that, because this basically just says we're going to allow it. and we don't have any kind of constraint on it.
Well, the whole program is to consider amending the zoning code to achieve these things. I mean, there is not a firm commitment that we will, after considering, implement these things.
But it's to consider to allow. It's to consider to allow.
If you look at the first phrase of the program, it's to consider amending the zoning code to permit and to allow.
I have a question.
Councilmember Scharf?
So I'm actually concerned about 2.1.3, which is amend the zoning code to increase the minimum density in all multifamily districts. I'm not sure why we necessarily need to do this. I'm thinking about Maybell. Maybell would have a higher density under the proposed project probably if you did this. Right, it's RM15 on part of the lot. I think they went below that, but I'm not sure. I think they went below the RM15 in terms of the number of minimum units.
The suggestion here, and actually for RM15, it's already in the housing element, is that there be a minimum of 8 dwelling units per acre in the RM15. It's just to ensure that where we have these zoned districts that allow for multifamily housing at some density, that we don't get a millionaire or a billionaire coming in and building,
Well, I think
3
that's the extreme
mansions.
case. The question is maybe there would be, and maybe the community would want the flexibility, frankly, to have lower density on some of those lots, and the developer would work with them, and that was what they would want. And that takes away that flexibility. I mean, I think the millionaire or billionaire option is a rare one where you're going to have someone buy something and just do that. So I actually think that in a lot of these circumstances, especially on like a lot like Maybell, people actually probably want as low as density as possible given the traffic issues there. At least that's what I heard from the community. And so I'm not sure that we want to limit the options that way. So I guess I'm not good with it.
Proposal you want to make?
I don't know if I have any support for it, but I guess, and I tell you my other concern is, I don't mind necessarily looking at doing this through the zoning code. I always get nervous when we put stuff into the housing element, because once you get it in with HCD, this would be viewed as anti-housing to take it out. And so taking it out could be really difficult once it's in there. So I hate to tie our hands for all future. I mean, the housing element is not something that we have control over once we put it in. It's very hard to become less pro-housing, and any policy that might possibly be viewed as creating less housing becomes a state mandate. And as everyone knows, I'm always concerned about losing local control. And I view this as something where we lose local control. And so my proposal would be that we just basically take out program 2.1.3. So I'll move we take out 2.1.3.
Let me second it just so I can ask staff the question. Why is it in here? What are the goals of the benefits of having this in here?
Well, one of the goals of this program was to, using the extreme example, to have single-family homes on RM40, which would be a serious underutilization of the property, understanding that the city does not have that many parcels zoned multifamily. So you want to maximize that resource, if you will. Secondly, I think the purpose of this was to provide some certainty also to some developers to develop multifamily housing. So if a developer came in to an RM30, RM40, they knew at least this is my floor, that worst case scenario, I can plan for X amount of units instead of having to go through the process of submitting maybe a higher density to get eventually to the negotiated density.
Let me ask a follow-up question. Historically, on RM 15, 30, and 40, do these fit in with the traditional use pattern? Or are they higher than the traditional use pattern? Average use pattern?
I'll have to take a look, but I know there is a chart in chapter 3 that shows recently, but most of those were PCs actually versus RM zones. So I'll have to take a look, but I will say that I keep on referring to 3159 El Camino. That was the first time that it had ever achieved the maximum density, but I don't. That is the Equinox project. That got the full 30 units per acre maximum density, but I would have to go back and take a look, a survey of other RM zone properties to see what the actual density is.
Can I speak to my motion and then?
Yeah.
So the more I think about this, the more I'm, we're sort of thinking about this a little bit on the fly, but the more I think about this, the more I'm convinced that this is a bad policy. And I want you to all imagine this. Somebody comes forward on a piece of property that's, RM30 in a neighborhood that we've zoned. One of the things I've heard from our staff is they don't have time to go through and look at all the zoning at every piece of property and make sure it's right. And that's one of the issues we've had. And I mean, I completely understand that. So if someone comes forward with an RM30 project, they want to do 30 units per acre, the community is really up in arms and comes to council. And they want something lower. The developer's willing to do it, and we say, no, you can't because you have this in here. I don't think that's good. I don't think that's positive. I don't think there's any reason to do that. I think we want to be really, and look, if we wanted to try this out in a zoning code, we can always change the zoning code. We can't change it once we put it in here. I mean, I think we're probably locked in forever, because every time we try and go back on the housing element, HCD will say, taking that out is anti-housing, and you'll have a problem getting it out.
I make two observations. One is, if that's the case, we shouldn't touch the RM15 minimum of 8 dwelling units to the acre, but because it's in our current housing element.
Right, I was just going to leave it. But I mean,
What the panel wanted to do was add the same concept for RM30 and RM40, and I think what they've done is modest, because it's saying that the minimum is half. Okay, it's not like they're saying the minimum is 30 or 40. They're saying the minimum is half of what the maximum is, which, I think is a modest.
but why lock yourself in?
Councilmember Holman?
So 2 observations on this. One is the devil's advocate way of looking at this, which I'm prone to do, which is, as you said, Tim, we don't have that many multifamily zone properties in town. So should somebody come in, and I don't know how likely it is that somebody's going to come in a multifamily district, but, markets turn quickly. So is it really very likely somebody's going to come in and buy an RM30 property and put up 2 houses? Maybe not so likely, but possible. But let's just say if we don't have minimum densities in there, and I appreciate your, Councilmember Scharf, your concerns, but if we don't put in minimum densities here and somebody does go in and build, let's just say 8 units to the acre, okay? We're just making the pressure from that development, or the lack of development, from that transfer to somebody else in the next housing element, because it's going to be part of our unmet numbers. So we're kicking the can down the road.
Well, let me just respond to that. That's not true, because once you build anything, you then no longer can carry it forward in your housing element. It's only when you don't build that you can carry it forward. So anything you build creates pressure from the next housing element.
And today, I was going to say something else too.
Councilmember Price, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should keep it in. I feel like this is the housing element, and we have a responsibility to provide opportunities to develop housing at a variety of densities in this community. With the increasing land costs and pressure on this community and other communities in California and in the peninsula, we need to do everything we can to provide opportunities for the development of needed housing. And, you know, frankly, I'd love to see this where the minimums are even higher, but I can see in this discussion, I won't go in that direction. But I think we need to retain this program in the housing element. In the unlikely event that someone would try to come in and develop something along the lines of what Ms. Gittleman said. I mean, there are R1 and R2 properties in this town where I've seen houses being built for $13 million in an R1 zone, and that was just building the house. That was not the cost of the land before they even showed up.
Commissioner Killer?
Thank you. I believe that the reason that the housing panel added this is because they wanted smaller units as opposed to bigger units. And they wanted more units. And it seems to me that being overly prescriptive in terms of exactly the minimum number is problematic from my point of view, and that should actually be studied as part of the housing or as part of an ordinance process, as opposed to fixing particular numbers in there. So I would actually suggest substituting different language for the entire thing, for the entire program overall, which is consider amending the zoning code to specify a minimum density or maximum unit size for multifamily zoning districts. And that allows basically a detailed and thorough study of the issue of both minimum density and maximum unit size, understand the interplay of those, and looking at it in a more thoughtful way than rushing through it right now.
I would support that.
Yeah.
Over there?
Yes.
Yes, I think so.
Okay, now I'm there. I suggest replacing program H 2.1.3 with the following text. Consider amending the zoning code to specify minimum density or maximum unit size for multifamily zoning districts. Consider amending the zoning code to specify a minimum density or maximum unit size for multifamily zoning districts. And that basically allows you to have the study done at that time and figure out exactly what makes sense and not be overly prescriptive in the housing element.
Councilmember Scharf?
Yeah, I would support that.
You want to move that?
I would move that. So if I was to move it, Karen would second it. So I will move it. Karen will second it.
Okay, any
Now
staff?
staff
comment?
has concerns.
Yeah, just would caution that at least leave what is existing, not to remove. We can reword the language for RM30 and RM40, but since this is an existing program that we have already adopted previously that says 8 units at RM15.
So I just want to point out that you are making my case for me on why this should not be here, because once you put it in there, staff never feels comfortable with taking it out. And that's why I want to do all this stuff through the zoning code. I don't want to do it in the housing element.
Perhaps the way to do that is to have my wording that I proposed and comma, including 8 units per acre for RM15. And then that allows you to include both of those, the current thought as well as the new thought. But you've basically considered it, so that you're saying consider it so you're not locked in.
I want to get clarification from staff that when we put consider, like we just made this motion, say we consider it and reject it, does that get us on HCD's radar and they give us a hard time in the next housing element, say, you didn't do that, you should have done it?
Well, that was kind of their position for the draft housing element. Many of our programs say explore, assess, consider, and they were concerned with some of those. That's why we negotiated Program 2.1.9 that had a little more commitment language that we would amend it to provide lot.
So couldn't we just put this on your work plan as opposed to, and put nothing, and just have this on your work plan and you bring it forward to us? Is there any reason to put it in the housing element?
At least with, excuse me, sorry, not to, but Councilmember Scharf, at least with these programs on, we are showing HCD that at least it is a proactive step to looking at housing production and accommodating our RENA numbers.
And to go back to your original question, Councilmember Scharf, I think if we say we're going to consider, all we have to do is consider. We may consider and decide we don't want to implement. And that's precisely why HCD was concerned when they reviewed our administrative draft. And Tim and the consultant had to work with them to sort of allay their fears, change a few of the programs to be more firm commitments. And it was helpful that we had this program in here about RM15 that was a commitment. So we didn't have to make other commitments. I think that as staff, we are just cautious. If we're going to take this out as a commitment, we might want to look at making a commitment somewhere else.
I'm not suggesting we take it out as a commitment. When I said don't put it, I would just leave, not the blue, I would just have, so haven't we already amended the zoning code to 8 dwelling units per acre or not?
We have not. We made that commitment in August of 2013, and we haven't implemented it yet.
Okay, so I would just amend the zoning code increase, and just leave it at that, and then say, consider other, if that's what you're thinking.
That'd be fine.
Okay.
So is that a change?
Yeah.
So you're leaving, amend the zoning code to increase the minimum density R15 to 8 dwelling units per acre, comma, and okay, period. Consider amending the zoning code for, to specific minimum densities.
To specify minimum density or maximum unit size.
Yeah, for other.
For multifamily zoning districts.
Yeah,
Or other, in this case, it would be other.
right.
Well, it might apply,
In other words, it doesn't apply to RM15.
You might choose to have maximum unit size apply to RM15 as well. That's why it's not other.
We could certainly do that without saying that here.
So I have a question. The issue of the maximum unit size, I'm actually not comfortable with that because I feel like we don't necessarily have a good, we need to provide flexibility regarding types of housing products and size because different parts of the market have different needs. So anything that we do, in my mind, that really restricts that in an actual way, I don't think is really meeting what is a sort of a changing demand and market over time. And so I'm not comfortable with the language related to maximum unit size.
So I'll take out the maximum unit size.
Okay,
Because
yeah,
that's,
I would agree with
I
that.
feel that that's just
take that out. I
too
agree.
prescriptive.
Okay. Shall we read what we have? Amend the zoning code to increase the minimum density in all RM15 to 8 dwelling units per acre, period. Consider amending the zoning code to specify minimum density in other residential,
multifamily zoning districts.
multifamily zoning districts.
Can I just make sure I have that? So amend the zoning code to increase the minimum or to specify the minimum density for RM15 would be 8 dwelling units per acre, and consider amending the zoning code to specify minimum densities for other multifamily zoning districts.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. That passes unanimously. Okay, other Comments or suggestions from council members? Let me just raise a couple points in the document. On page 70, these are now page numbers in the housing element itself. Oh, I'm sorry, it's page let's see, Hillary, I'm looking for the traffic mitigation. I guess it's page 70 of the packet. Yeah. It's the only reference to mitigations in the housing element, and it has traffic. As the traffic mitigation is preparation of site-specific assessments of transportation and traffic impacts according to the standard environmental review process. And my understanding of the standard is that if it's underneath 34 units, no environmental impact study is needed. And since these projects are likely to come in under 34, the question is, how do we measure the cumulative traffic impacts?
I think there are two issues here. What size project warrants environmental review? And so that's kind of a screening exercise. And I think that's what you're referring to, that in some instances we've used 30 units
Yes,
the
well,
acre.
what we're voting on here is the total, the cumulative number of
Right.
2,000.
Right, and what the environmental analysis has said is that we've looked holistically at the city. We're not changing zoning here. We're not adding any new sites. We're relying on sites that are already zoned. So we've considered the cumulative context, but we haven't considered site-specific impacts that might happen as these sites develop. So we included a mitigation measure to ensure that those were adequately considered at the time. And we would use our standard methodology, which would include a screening step, so if the project has to be of a certain size to warrant a quantitative analysis. And then the standard methodology for that analysis, provided it trips over the screening threshold.
And the cumulative impact, how do we measure?
That
track
analysis would also include a cumulative analysis, because every time we do a traffic analysis, we look at site-specific impacts, and then we look at them in the context of the traffic network with volumes projected by
Yes.
our
but
friends at VTA.
We haven't done that so effectively in the past, so just a note that we might be sensitive in the future. Yes, Councilmember Price.
Yes, if I may borrow that for a second. A couple of comments on this. The transportation traffic impact, methodology, as you know, right now, there's draft language related to draft guidelines regarding traffic impact analysis that's related to CEQA, right? And the question is, will LOS be used as a standard, or the proposal is to use vehicle miles traveled and not LOS. And VTA is in charge of the traffic impact analyses that are required for projects that generate a certain number of trips. Now, a lot of this is going to be subject to change, in fact, as those draft guidelines are ultimately, modified and adopted. So anything we do here is going to be directly related to what ultimately are the adopted draft guidelines regarding the traffic impact analysis. Isn't that correct? Because it's undergoing revision right now.
Councilmember Price is correct. The whole regime of traffic analysis is undergoing some change in response to state legislation. So the Office of Planning and Research is developing alternatives to the standard intersection level of service. and it's going to then be incumbent on VTA to incorporate the new methodology, whatever it is, probably something related to vehicle miles traveled, into their guidance to local agencies like Palo Alto. And that's why we've kind of referenced the city's standard environmental review process, because we're going to have to change our standard environmental review process once these things come down to us from Sacramento and the VTA. And the language here, we think, is broad enough to encompass that change. We don't know how fast this is going to happen. It may still take several years.
Yeah, I guess the traffic,
So the language here, because it could be a year or two before this is sort of tightened up, but it has a lot of ripple impacts in terms of traffic and
Right.
transportation analysis.
And the biggest effect, in my view, is it's going to become just a whole lot harder to communicate around transportation impacts because people are so used to level of
LOS,
service.
right.
And now we're going to be using totally new metrics.
Right.
But I think the language of the mitigation measure is broad enough to allow this whole process to happen, and the mitigation measure will still be adequate.
Okay, so you think it'll ride the tide as this rolls down?
I believe so.
Okay, thank you.
yeah, I just want to be sure that we are sensitive to traffic mitigation, that the VTA, that we have a chance to discuss and assess changes made by the VTA and others, and what impacts that might have on Palo Alto. So,
This is getting a little off topic, but the VTA just updated their guidelines, and they're going to have to update them again once the Office of Planning and Research is finished with their work. And at that point, we'll have to look at them and assimilate them into our practices here.
and share them with the council.
Absolutely.
Great. Councilmember Holman.
Two things. One has to do with traffic, and maybe it's off a little bit expanded on the point or not. Palo Alto can make our traffic thresholds, we can make them more stringent than CEQA, can we not? Or the VTA standards or whatever. The reason it's come to mind, it's been on my mind a lot, is when we were looking at, some months ago, the project at Page Mill and El Camino. And even though it was a significant project, it didn't trigger a significant impact, because even though the intersection's at an F, it didn't create enough of a worse situation that there was any mitigation required, because it didn't trigger a significant threshold. So I remember saying at the time, it's like, so we have F and F'er. And so, and we can talk about this later, but since we're talking about this, can we set our own thresholds that are more stringent?
That's a large subject that we should talk about. We can certainly set our own screening thresholds when things require quantitative review, but I think we're seeing the state get into this area and try and prevent local agencies from setting unreasonably low thresholds, and that's why there was this legislation to move away from level of service. So I would just urge caution on that. I think, yes, you're right, local agencies do have discretion, but the state is starting to put a box around that. So we should talk about that at another.
Let's do talk about that, because we're exacerbating existing situations. The other one on the mitigated negative deck on packet page 33, cultural resources, and it talks about archaeological resources, and it also talks about historic resources that are National California Register.
This one.
And I guess both of these, because to me, we could have significant impacts, or potentially significant impacts, on either one, because, even when Stanford was doing their project along Sand Hill Road, they encountered, prehistoric remains and had to move grave sites and stuff. And then also we have, houses that are listed on the register and Californian National Register. So I guess I'm not sure why this says less than significant in both those categories instead of potentially significant, because there is potential for disturbance or impact to either one. And as a matter of fact, I should say that the historic resources like the California National Register aren't even referenced here in the discussion, unless I overlooked it.
If I can respond to that, and maybe Tim will correct me if I'm wrong, I think we actually looked at the housing sites that are included in the inventory and determined that they did not include any California Register properties. So that was.
But they
we were-
could be adjacent to. I mean, in the SOFA 2, and the SOFA 2 plan even talks about adjacencies.
I guess it's possible, but the threshold for the significant impact is whether construction on one of these sites that we've identified would significantly alter the character-defining features of a resource. And while I guess that's conceivable, I mean, we know that all of these projects are going to go through design review. There's going to be an opportunity to review them on a site-specific basis. And so we didn't feel like we needed to put that in as mitigation per se. The same with the archaeological resources. I think we felt that our standard conditions and our standards review process and the laws that are in place to govern the medical examiner process and the like were sufficient so that we didn't have to actually put in mitigation. But the hazardous materials and the transportation issues, we thought, well, we need to do belt and suspenders on those. There are instances where we may not be aware of hazards or where the site-specific traffic is beyond what we can anticipate at this time, and we should put the mitigation in for that. I mean, we could have sliced it a different way, but that was our that was our thinking.
Yeah, because I know you didn't put any of the historic sites on, but, you know, there's off-site impact as well. So that's why I raised that for both these categories.
Okay, Councilmember Sharf?
So I wanted to go back to program 12.1.9.
2.1.9?
Yeah, H 2.1.9, sorry. Yeah, page 132, 133. So first of all, I'll note that on page 143, we're talking about preparing a local parking demand database to determine parking standards. You know, for senior affordable. So I think we're going to take a data-based approach to that. That's the way I read that. I would not be okay if we have a data-based approach to something that says senior affordable housing needs X number of spaces and family affordable housing needs something else, and then saying we're going to reduce the parking in spite of what we said in our database. And so that's on page 133, because we talk about amending the zoning code to create zoning incentives that encourage the consolidation of smaller lots identified as housing inventory sites. I'm good with that. What I'm not good with is incentives may include development review streamlining, good with that. Reduction in required parking for smaller units, I don't see why we would do that. I mean, I don't see the nexus between a small unit and not having a car. I do see a nexus between affordable housing, senior affordable housing, income levels, but the size of the unit, not really. I might see it if it's next to transit, but then I think it's the same as a non-affordable using probably. So I'm very concerned about that, and I'm also concerned about setback modifications. What we've heard from the community is they don't want urban canyons. And I'm not quite so sure why we would be doing this, frankly. I don't think people are happy with 801 Alma, and I'm concerned that we're doing stuff that we don't need to do here. So I guess I'd like to get a little bit of staff feedback on that. And the other thing is I'm not sure why it has to be 100% affordable, why we wouldn't provide consolidation of smaller lots identified as housing inventory sites.
If I can interject, of all of the programs we're talking about, this is the one that HCD wanted to see.
Okay.
So we should be very cautious. With that said, I don't think they care about the examples we use here. The incentives can include ... That was crafted by us.
Can we just stop it with, do we have, and they want to see 100% affordable housing sites, right? That's what they want to see.
Yes.
Yes.
So could we just stop it with there, or do we need to put incentives may include? And it says may include, but I mean, I think it's.
May include is pretty broad and not much of a risk.
It's pretty broad, and also all these incentives are already available through density bonus. If they're going to have 100% affordable housing, we can say something. If incentives may include and consistent with density bonus incentives, these type of things also, because they're already available in reality. So we can add a little additional wording.
If I might, I think Councilmember Sharp brings up a good point. I think what we don't want to have happen here, because we did minimize the setback concession in the density bonus law, so I wouldn't want somebody to use this to double dip.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. I would rather not show it, frankly, if we don't have to. I mean,
Yeah, that's a second thing also, is that HCD wanted this program included because there are other outside organizations who wanted this program also, specifically public advocates. And so they're going to be looking at this. Whether they want examples or not.
Yeah, were they asking for specific examples like this?
I didn't pose that direct question. They certainly are interested to see what incentives the city is providing, but I think, well, if we put in extra language to say that, yes, these incentives are already consistent with our density bonus ordinance, but we'll look at additional, I think, to back up, public advocates is more interested that the city meets with our affordable housing developers to see what requirements they would like to see relaxed in order to, and maybe we can turn those incentives. Whether they're different from these, we're not sure, but I'm sorry.
But these are promising incentives in addition to the requirements we already have, the density bonuses that already exist.
I don't know if we can say that it would be on top of.
I don't think we want to say it's on.
Right, but no, I mean,
Agree.
they would say that. They're not saying,
Yeah, HCD has seen this program because as part of it, this is a modification from a program that is in the current housing element where we're talking. And in the current housing element, this program talks about lot consolidation for any parcels. And so we wanted to remove this program, since lot consolidation is happening on the market level. But HCD did not like to see us remove this because they want to encourage affordable housing and projects. And that's why we specifically put in 100% affordable housing projects.
Could we look at just getting rid of setback modifications, because reduction in required parking doesn't say how much. It doesn't quantify it. And setback reductions, we've had significant issues with that in this community, and for good reason.
I think if we remove that, that's okay. We might want to maybe replace it with something else, but I think removing it, specifically setbacks, I think is okay. Unless the affordable housing developers say that's a real issue, but for now, and also, again, they can request it as part of a density bonus program too.
Right.
do you want to make that a formal motion?
Sure, that we reduce setback modification as a part of program H2.1.9.
Are you saying eliminate setback modifications?
Yes.
So, you know,
Need a second.
I know you do. I just need to flesh this out a little bit. I obviously don't want it in there. I don't want the smaller, I don't want the parking in there either. I don't want any of that in there. But what I'm hearing from you is that we're considering it, right? And I'm all about practical impacts. I'm all about, are you gonna go back to HCD and we're gonna have a fight about this? And if so, are we gaining anything by doing this? Are we gaining, if we leave it in there and we don't do it, because incentives may include. So, but does that mean that they can look at this housing and say incentives may include, and as you as planning director are gonna say, oh, it says may include in there, and therefore we're gonna do it, or are you gonna say, or are we coming back and discussing zoning code changes, and we as a council can say, no, we're not gonna do that? So is this used, because this says adopt amendments as appropriate, So without amendments to the zoning code, this means nothing. That's what I'm assuming, but I'm never quite sure these days.
I think it's dangerous to have it in there.
I guess the first sentence, though, starts out by amend the zoning code to create zoning incentives.
We are committing to amend the zoning ordinance to create incentives. What we're trying to do here is say, it may be these, it may be others. But we are committing to add incentives to our zoning ordinance, and that was really
pretty
important to
strong.
HCD.
And when we go back and amend our zoning ordinance to only do ones that are already included in the density bonus, we're going to be okay with that?
No.
Well, I'm just curious. I mean, I don't see why we couldn't. but
I
I'm
think
asking
we're going to
the
be
question.
pressed by the advocates and HCD to do more than you can already do under the density bonus law. I mean, to be perfectly honest, they're going to say, well, that's just a sham if all you're doing is offering us incentives we already have.
And you're saying they won't approve our housing element if we take out the examples?
I think we should be cautious about taking out all of the examples.
And if we just take out one, I mean, if we take out the setbacks, you're saying it's worth the fight, it's not going to be a problem? Or you'll come back to us if it is, I guess.
Could I make
Yeah,
a
I think
comment?
it's okay to remove setback modifications. Yeah, to completely
Okay,
slash the rest.
no, that's fine.
would
Then I will
be-
go with Karen's amendment to
But-
on the setbacks.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to
Councilman.
comment, yeah, I mean, I will reluctantly go with the issue of the deletion of setback modifications, because it doesn't say, to what degree, and it's, the issue here is to provide flexibility. I think maybe we're getting overly paranoid. Meaning that the staff that reviews these housing elements has so many housing elements to review, they are not going to be necessarily poring over the phrase within this program. Now, maybe I could be wrong. Because I think that actually this language, I see virtually very little risk with this language. It says may include, and it provides examples of things that are done in other communities in terms of the smaller units and reduction of the parking requirements. But I think we're perfectly fine and safe, and the issue is we also want to get this through the system. And I think removing that one phrase is fine, but I guess I'm not having the issues on this that some of my colleagues are having.
Okay, any last comments?
Last comment. Oh, not about this issue.
Commissioner Keller,
About this issue, another one.
this issue.
So firstly, when the housing density bonus law was passed by the Planning Commission onto the council, there was a provision in there regarding additional concessions potentially for 100% affordable housing. And the council struck that provision. And I'm wondering if some reinstatement or modification of that provision would satisfy HCD.
Commissioner Keller, there is a program that has been reintroduced to allow for additional incentives for 100% affordable housing. Yeah.
Okay, so it
there's
came
a
back-
separate program.
It came back as a program, but, and presumably this will come back as a study of the housing density bonus law and looking at all these things in a comprehensive, single fashion as opposed to piecemeal. Is that the idea?
That can be the process. Just to point out, it is program 2.1.6. And so, yeah, it can be folded in as we
Yeah, I would
review
recommend.
the current housing density bonus ordinance.
Yeah, I'd suggest that those, I'm not, I'm not suggesting a textual change about that. I'm just suggesting that when this comes back, that they be looked at as part of the housing density bonus law, both of them together, not separated.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
I think we need to vote.
We need to vote on 2.1.9, the modifications.
Page 133. 133.
133. record.
Yeah, I was just looking then at,
Wait a minute, is to drop setback modifications.
but I was just looking at H2.1.6 and see, isn't that redundant with H2.1.9?
No, this is focused on smaller lot size.
And consolidation.
That's true, that's true.
Okay, all in favor of the amendment? Aye. That passes unanimously. Drop the 2 words. Okay, any further changes?
One other further question.
Yeah.
So I want to discuss the PC plan community development issues on page 109. So
Okay.
my biggest concern is we have not vetted the whole idea of affordable housing overlays. 801 Alma was developed completely with density bonus. It wasn't a PC. It's a standalone, single-purpose, affordable housing. If that worked, it could have been done as a PC, but it's clearly not necessary to do these things as a PC. So I don't really understand what an AHO is, and it seems like it's on the fly, and it seems like we're committing, if we do away with a PC, to basically do that. I'm uncomfortable with that. I am not sure, first of all, I'm not sure why we need to have any language in here about this until we actually make any reforms or decide what we're going to do.
I can offer a response. I'm actually surprised at your concern because we tried to hedge our bets here. We tried to say that PC is either going to be reformed or it's going to be eliminated. And in the case, if it's reformed, we want to make sure it preserves the ability to use PC for affordable housing. And in the instance, if it's eliminated, we want to make sure that there is a substitute mechanism that's effective at.
I would be fine if we said that, that there's a substitute mechanism. That's where my concern ends.
I think that says a quote, a possible substitute or mechanism could be affordable housing overlay.
I'm having a heartburn over because I don't really know what it does, and I feel like this is how we commit to things without them being fully vetted, and then suddenly that becomes the default option because it's in the housing element. Whereas I don't understand why we can't end it where it says, if the PC code is removed, the city will replace the PCs with another mechanism that would provide the same affordable housing opportunities. Why do you need to go further? I mean, here we are committing to keep it the same, committing to keep the same affordable housing opportunities. Why are we throwing out, an overlay that, we haven't really talked about? I mean, we haven't had a study session on this. We haven't talked about having affordable housing opportunity overlays.
Councilmember Scharf, well, as part of this discussion, it also says if the PC zone is removed. So if it's revised, that's great, but if it is removed, then we look possibly at a substitute such as an affordable housing overlay. And that was the intent.
And just based on the just based on the study session we had the other day, it does look like there was council support for the reform rather than remove.
No, absolutely, but this
So
is
I
a
think
7-year document. This is not this is a 7-year document that we continue on. And my real question is, I'm not saying we loosen affordable housing opportunities. That's not where I'm going with this. I'm just saying, why do you need to put in the rest of that? Why couldn't it just end with provide the same affordable housing opportunities? I mean, that seems like a pretty clear statement to me. Provide the same affordable housing. In fact, I would say provide the same or similar, frankly, if it was me, but I'm a lawyer. But I don't understand why we need that in there. I mean, there's probably 10 different ways you could approach this.
Councilmember Price, you had
I actually want
Just-
an answer.
Should I wait?
I did want a staff reaction to that. I mean, that's what I'm asking. It's the last part of that.
Okay, you've asked the question.
So, Councilmember Scharf, I think you're right. We probably didn't need to put in that additional example about how it could be achieved, but I think putting in the concept of an affordable housing overlay as a possible substitute will give comfort to HCD and the advocates that there is a meaningful alternative to PCs if PCs get eliminated. Affordable housing overlays are used in other jurisdictions. The advocates and HCD know what we're talking about when we use those words. The idea is basically it's a zoning tool to allow affordable housing, to prescribe an area where affordable housing is accomplished. So we could provide more detail about what that means, or we could strike it. I don't think either would be a fatal flaw to the document, but that's the rationale.
Councilmember Price.
Yeah, I was going to say, mentioning this as, again, I think there's a paranoia here. Mentioning this as a possibility is not committing us. It is suggesting that we are thoughtful about options and other opportunities. This would never happen in reality without it going through all the machinations and a zoning code amendment, and it'll be thrashed around and it'll be examined, which is good. This is not saying this is going to be prescriptive, this is going to happen. If this were to happen, we will go through our normal process of examining it. And I think there's virtually no risk with including this language. It's flexible. I would say keep it exactly the way it is.
I'm happy to make a motion.
Okay, motion?
All right, I'll make a motion that so I'm making my motion based on the fact that you said you don't think it would be a fatal problem to just end it with the same affordable housing opportunities, which to me seems to be a very strong statement in favor of affordable housing. It just seems not to. So I will make the motion that says we delete where it says the yes, a possible substitute or mechanism could be an affordable housing overlay AHO.
And all the way down to the end?
Yes.
Okay, is there a second?
I'm not understanding what you said. Please repeat it. Are you making, what are you doing?
So I would like to see this ended where it says, if the PC code is removed, the city will replace the PC zone with another mechanism that would provide the same affordable housing opportunities, which to me is a very strong statement. Period.
Second. Any second? There's no second. Okay, other comments? I just have 3 brief comments on the housing element thing. On page 127, we have past performance cycles. It doesn't have to be in the document, but I think it would be helpful if you could provide as background our achievement record over the, 20 years that we've been in the program. Yeah, I think we've had 4 now, haven't we? So just to give a sense of what happens over time with these things, I think that'd be helpful contextual information for the council.
And Councilmember Schmidt, if we put that in the staff report rather than in the document.
Yeah, that would be fine. I see it for the council members having that. On page 10 of which document of the background materials, the staff report, page 10, a letter, packet page 10. In the letter from HCD, they asked, the element includes several program actions where the city indicates it will explore, consider, assess programs. We hope this happens early in the process. Again, I think for context, it would be helpful if you could just give a list when this goes to the council of here are the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 items that we have said we would respond to, just so we have a sense of that as we begin to deal with it. The last element on page 78 of the housing element, it's in the section where we talk about financial resources, and table 3.10 points out that we have over the last 6 years, collected more money from the residential housing fund than we have from the commercial housing fund. I think on the page 79, we point, in addition, there's a below market rate program that new housing units pay for, which seems to place a major part of the burden on residents, new residentials, paying for our affordable housing program. And I think there should be a sentence in here noting that we are currently doing an assessment of our development impact funds of both commercial and housing side, so that it is clear that this is not necessarily where we want to be in the future. Staff?
Yes, just to respond, we do have text about a nexus study right above on page 78 that, yes, the city is in the process of preparing a commercial and residential nexus study to reevaluate our current fees or BMR requirements.
Okay, I guess I would like to see that there is a concern that in the previous, period of time, the housing impact has been, the residential impact has been much higher than the commercial impact. Just to note that this is of concern. Now, do we need a motion for that?
I'm sorry, Councilmember Schmidt, are you requesting that we edit the text here to say that, or are you making an observation?
Well, I guess I'd like to add a sentence in the text so that when people read our housing element, they see that there is an identification and concern of the issue.
I guess, my response would be that the data in the table speaks for itself. I mean, you see in some years the residential is higher, in some years commercial is higher. You're correct that over the 6-year period we selected, the residential was higher. But I don't know what more we can say that isn't, obvious from the.
Well, on the facing page, though, it says, in addition, there is an impact on BMR on housing building that's in addition to the funds collected. Is that correct?
Councilmember, it's either or, so they either provide the units or the fees. It's not
Right, but
in addition
Table
to.
310 measures the fees provided. It does not measure the value of the residential building. So if you,
Understood.
yeah,
It doesn't take into consideration those units that have been set aside in developments and
Right,
their value.
which are more valuable than the in lieu fees.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's just a sense that it should be obvious to a reader going through here that there is some connection, there's a nexus between the two tables. Okay, I guess let me then make a motion to add a sentence at the end of the first paragraph on page 78 saying there is a concern that the commercial developers are not paying an equitable share of funds for housing. comment?
You might want to make reference to Program H 3.1.6, which talks about developers of employment-generating commercial industrial developments contributing to the supply of low and moderate-income housing through the payment of commercial in lieu fee. And reference, that's on page 139. And it indicates a timeframe continue to regularly update the commercial in lieu fee. So if you're making a reference to the number being too low, then it basically augurs for a evaluation of the impact fee and through the nexus study and adjusting the fees appropriately.
Yeah, I think that is clearly referenced. Question, any second? The statement would add at the end of paragraph 1 on page 78 a sentence saying there is concern that the commercial fees are less than the fees and BMR program contribution to the programs.
Councilmember Schmidt, I think your earlier statement was maybe a little more direct. It was there is concern that the commercial developers are not paying an equitable share of funds for housing.
Okay, good. Yes.
Okay, good, okay.
Okay, is there a second?
Yes, and did you want to reference program H 3.1.6? Just like maybe parenthetically.
Okay.
Okay.
C, program 1.3.6, page 139.
Perhaps you can say through program can be addressed. This can be addressed through program H 3.1.6. Yeah.
Yeah.
Either way, I think if it's
that's
just
clear.
parenthetically referred to, it's okay too.
Yeah.
I think it's the same thing.
Now, second? Okay. Again, I think there is a large discrepancy in contributions, and especially with our new RENA allocations, which are now based on job growth. The nexus would clearly say that commercial job growth is a major contributor to our housing needs. And so
So why do you think they're based on job growth? They weren't. They actually weren't based on job growth.
No, the change in rules used to be driven, HCD was driven by the state demographer's forecast. And in the recent thing, they moved from tied the state demographer to jobs growth.
So you're talking about not Palo Alto's allocation. You're talking about the entire Bay Region's allocation. Because Palo Alto's allocation is not driven by job growth.
It's,
It's not.
base numbers for the Bay Area are driven by jobs.
So right, so you're talking about the entire 180 whatever thousand
So
units.
every community should have the same concern we do, that the commercial side should pay a fair share.
Right. No, I just thought it was important to be accurate, because we say things like Palo Alto's, RENA numbers are a result of job creation, and they're not.
Okay, but the model used for the RENA allocation is job
So no, it's not the model for the RENA allocation, it's the model for the RENA, because the allocation implies allocation between cities. at least to me. When you say the RENA number, the total RENA number, that's different. But I think we're just talking semantics.
Okay.
So what is the rate we charge commercial developers, and what is the rate we charge? Is it a per square footage, or how does this work?
Councilmember Scharf, the commercial impact fee is per square foot for new commercial square footage minus some exemptions, but it's $19.31. $19.31 per square foot. And for BMRs, we always have required or emphasized units in the development, and they can request an option to fee out. And if they do fee out, it's 7.5% of the sales price per unit. Yes, and in a Bay Area survey, the city's $19 commercial impact fee is one of the highest in the Bay
Didn't Mountain
Area.
View just go to a $10 fee?
Yeah, maybe something like that.
50% of ours?
It was actually much higher in the Nexus study, but politically, I think it was, $9 or $10 in that general. I think Sunnyvale's 7 or something like that.
Because we have like 3 times Sunnyvale's roughly. It's twice Mountain View's.
Yeah.
But our housing prices are higher, so we need more money. Yeah, the goal is just equitable, fair share. Any other comments? Okay, shall we have a vote? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? I think we have only 3 votes.
So is there any practical application of this?
We're already underway. Well, not only have we committed to the Nexus study, we're underway with it, and we should have results very soon that presumably will allow us to adjust both the residential and the commercial fees should we wish to do so.
And it'll be going to Finance Committee.
It's that presumably that is the key word.
What happens if I abstain?
That's possible.
I don't know, it seems premature. I mean, we're doing the Nexus study. We're understanding it. We have the highest commercial fees in the thing. I'll just vote no.
Okay, that passes 3-1. Okay, I notice that we are reaching our time limit. Is there any other comments on this, and do we have a recommendation? Commissioner Keller.
I'm going to try to be brief, and I have some documents that I'm going to give to the clerk to give out. The interesting thing is, I'm going to basically say 2 things about the documents that you can review at your leisure. And one is that there is a distinct shortage of small units. Fewer than 21% of the housing units in Palo Alto are small units, the studios and 1-bedrooms, while fully 60% of the households in Palo Alto are 1 or 2 persons only. And so I think that looking at small units is important. The second thing is you'll see, the data in the first 2 documents. The second thing is this data here that I've given people about the school impacts. Now, the housing element is the only time we are allowed to consider school impacts. We are not allowed to consider them in individual housing developments or anything like that. We're allowed to consider them in terms of the housing element. And as far as I can tell, we have failed to do so.
Is this agendized? I mean, aren't we supposed to have these kind of discussions on an agendized basis? I mean, I'm not sure. We don't have committee member comments.
Well, yeah, I think Commissioner Keller is going to get to a point about the text of the housing element or the substance of the
I
housing
think
element.
we need to start with the substance of the housing element. I think we need to be very transparent and very careful about having discussions that are not agendized.
Well, I think that this is this first of all, it's either relevant to item 1 or item 2. It fits in both categories if you wish. But I think that we have failed to consider the impact of housing on schools at all in terms of any of the meetings I've been to in the housing element, and I think that's problematic. And as a segue to number 2, if I may just finish the thought, as we consider what our follow-up is in terms of the future role of the housing element, there's certainly issues about considering the housing element and the changing to the housing sites. In terms of that, I think we also need to revisit the housing element goals, policies, and programs in the process of that in concert with considering the evaluation of the changes, the updates to the comprehensive plan. And when we do so, we definitely need to consider the impact on schools. And I realize that there was was insufficient for doing that this time, but we need to consider that the next go-around. And that means next go-around, next year or two, not 8 years from now. Thank you.
Okay, I would just make a comment that the next meeting of the City School Liaison Committee is on student enrollments. So an opportunity to discuss with the school district that issue. Okay, any other last comments?
Do we need to move the housing
Yes.
element as a
We
goal?
need a motion to move the housing element as amended to the council. Okay. Yeah, mitigated negative declaration. Okay, well, I think we have been discussing this for the last 10 months, and we have looked at it carefully, integrated the comments of the committees and the Planning Commission, and I congratulate staff on moving this along and getting at least preliminary HCD approval. So delighted to support this. Seconder, want to say something? Don't have to.
Okay. I will reluctantly support this. I originally walked into this meeting thinking I would vote no, because I feel that this is extremely well done. I want to say that. It was extremely thoughtfully done and very, very thorough. But I'm still going back to the discussions we had earlier about the various tiers as it related to housing opportunity sites. And I think this would have been a much more rigorous, much more forward-thinking housing element if we had moved all the way through Tier 6, which includes the California Avenue surface parking lots, University Avenue surface parking lots, and various miscellaneous sites that have been identified. I feel we've done a good job, but I think we've done a very timid job in terms of really developing a stronger housing element. But recognizing that there have been lots of layers of review and input and very thoughtful consideration, recognizing that we have deadlines upon us and we have to keep moving, I will support it, but I am doing it with these statements that I wish it had been stronger and we had included more tiers in the housing opportunity sites. I think that would have been the smart thing to do.
Let's see, a follow-up to staff. There is a clear statement, council-approved statement, that we will continue to look at new sites. Is that right? Can you identify where that is?
Councilmember Schmidt, it's program 2.2.5, page 135 of the housing element. Identify more transit-rich housing sites after HCD certification as part of the comprehensive plan update process.
Yeah, I guess that's the minimum for looking at the new tiers.
Yeah.
Any other comments? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? That passes unanimously to the council. Let's see, we have one other item on our agenda, and that is a discussion of the future role of the committee. I guess we should keep our comments relatively short.
Yeah, I need to go.
But the goal is not to have a motion, but just to state if there is what each of the members feel is the future role of this committee, and does it have a role? Councilmember Sharp, if you have to go, do you want to just?
Yeah, I
give
do.
your
I mean, I
comments?
clearly think we should keep the committee together. I've been consistent on that the entire time. The reason we're approving this housing element now was not because we're done with the housing element. We were planning on continuing to have meetings and look at other options because we had a gun to our head in terms of getting the timing. And therefore, I think this committee should stay together and has important work to do.
Thank you. Councilmember Holman?
Agree with those comments, plus I think this committee ought to be the committee that addresses the issues that we have with the structure, assumptions, and bases for housing allocations. I think this ought to be the body that works with state legislators to try to address some of those fallacies, I'll say. So I definitely think the committee ought to stay together.
Councilmember Price?
Yes, I think it's definitely worthwhile. I guess my concern is the bandwidth of the staff to continue to support this committee on a monthly basis. And given all the other projects that are before them, including the revision of the comprehensive plan, I could go on and on. There are probably 10 or 15 reports or studies that are critical. I'm not convinced that this needs to meet as frequently. That would be my proposal. I think there's definitely a need for more conversation, serious conversation about housing. I've expressed some of my concerns before. I'm just not sure that the frequency of the meeting, maybe it could be every other month. That's a detail, and then called on an as-needed basis when the council is, continues to address housing issues.
Thank you. I guess just to follow up, I think as we go through the comp plan process, there obviously will be things that will impact housing, how we think about housing, zoning issues, public benefits, and so on, that will have an impact on the housing element we approved. And I think it's important to have someone looking at the consequences of the council changes on the comp plan on what it means for housing. I have a specific interest in where the housing sites are identified and any modifications that might take place, especially as we go through specific plans and precise plans in various areas that have been identified in the housing element, and how that would impact and affect what we have done and modifications we might make. So I think there is a role for a council committee to continue to look at that. I am sensitive, as others have mentioned, to the timing of the planning staff, and to make sure that it can fit in and that it is useful to you in working through that process. Commissioner Keller.
I think it's important for this committee to continue. I agree that it depends on the timing of when the housing element, in particular housing inventory sites, are revisited. And in particular, I think that there are things we can think about, in particular doing more for promoting senior housing for people to be able to age within our community instead of being able to move outside. And we may think about additional housing types. So although HCD does not consider senior housing without kitchens to be a count towards our housing element count, the problem is that that's an important use. Assisted living and things like that are an important use that we need to promote within our community. Unfortunately, that's now zoned commercial. And as a result of that, when Casa Olga converted from that use to a hotel, it was considered change from commercial to commercial, and instead of change from a residential type use to a commercial type use. So if we had actually had that use and Casa Olga was that zoning and that Casa Olga was zoned that way, when it got converted, we would actually have been able to capture the true impacts of converting that to commercial. So we need to both consider that as a zoning type and consider how to promote more senior housing in Palo Alto, and particular underserved communities. And I think that for our young people who are working in Palo Alto, increasingly finding places for them to live is increasingly problematic. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, everyone, for your comment.
And thank you. As I told the chair, I'll communicate all of these ideas to Jim. I'm sure it's going to be Jim in conversation with the full council in January that'll make the decision about the committee. And apropos of that, I don't think we will schedule a next meeting. We'll take vacation, as it were, until January or until the council calls on us again.
So absolutely, until January, we'll see what the council says about the future.
It's been a pleasure working with you and your staff on these important issues.
Great, and so we have achieved our goal. Congratulations to the committee, and the session is over. Sorry that went on so long.